Right. Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us, and particularly a huge thank you to Sophia for joining us super late because I know you're based in Boston on the East Coast yourself. So this is as late as you could possibly go. So I really appreciate it. We've all been really excited to hear and learn from you for quite some time. As I just mentioned, we've been collecting a lot of good questions from the audience. Again, for folks who just joined, we want to make it as interactive for all of you as possible. So please feel free to use the raise hand function on Zoom anytime, or of course, if you're in the physical space, actually raise your hand and just walk up to the camera. We're the podium where Gerald is standing right now to ask a question. And then, of course, you can also text it into chat and we can save those for the end. And then very quickly, just before we start, of course, because Sophia is based in Boston, this event is virtual, but we typically do have a ton of in-person gatherings as well in the Bay Area. So Sophia, when you're in the Bay Area, you'll have to let us know. But we also have an in-person event coming up on October 9th evening with Teresa, who is on the board of a number of amazing companies relevant to our topic today on AI. She's serving on the board of Snowflake. So obviously do a lot of the data related work that I'm sure we'll get into. So for anyone who's in the Palo Alto, Stanford area or wants to come down, we have that next event in person. And then, of course, our annual conference is on November 3rd on campus where Gerald's camera is situated on campus at UC Berkeley. So we would love to see you in person, but in the meantime, we're super excited to have Sophia here with us today, joining us virtually again from Boston. And as a brief introduction, Sophia, I'll kind of read your official bio, but I want to pass then over to you to actually explain how all those dots connect together. So without further ado, Sophia is a renowned tech business industry leader for Fortune 200 companies. She was a former chief product officer for Aptiv. Prior to that, she was the chief AI technology officer and general manager of AI products and search at Microsoft. Her team has worked extensively in traditional and generative AI products, including OpenAI and ChatGPT. Of course, I'm sure the two that you're all very curious about. Her leadership journey also includes launching AI products at tech giants, including Google, Alphabet, and Apple. So her experiences literally span across the most relevant tech companies of our decade. She is currently an AI advisor to the National Science Foundation, she's been also featured in the World Economic Forum, the National Association of Certified Directors, then Forbes and Business Insider, to mention a few. So it is a huge pleasure for us to welcome Sophia to join our virtual fireside chat session with Decode today. Thank you for joining us, Sophia.
Thank you for having me. The Decode community is something dear to my heart. Went to Berkeley for my master's in mechanical engineering and minors in materials. And I also went to Stanford for executive corporate governance in Stanford Law. So both university is something I've been very involved with and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you join us because, as you know, and for folks who are joining, Decode is the largest tech and entrepreneurship nonprofit that is co-hosted between Berkeley and Stanford. So we have tons of latest industry insights, career advice, all of which hopefully is relevant for folks who are joining us today. So to help us get started, I would actually love to dive into your personal experiences a little bit more, Sophia. If you could help us connect the dots of from studying at Berkeley and at Stanford, how did you choose your career path and how did you end up collecting literally a portfolio of experiences at all of these amazing companies?
Yeah. So I'm an immigrant that came when I was 1 year old to New York City, and my parents started a dry cleaning business. So was part of that business, really got into technology to help them with their the dry cleaning business, 7 stores and a factory is at the high point. And it just like computers interested in me. I went to Bronx Science, which was a magnet school in the New York area. So I was able to dive deeper into the different STEM topics and basically decided I wanted to become an engineer. Applied to Georgia Tech and got a full scholarship there, studying mechanical engineering. Didn't know where mechanical engineering I wanted to do, but I love Star Trek and Star Wars and all these technologies that sci-fi feature, and I wanted to be part of it. And lo and behold, I also noticed that there was a huge boom in semiconductor at the time. So this is late 1990s and so forth. And so I focused on that semiconductor, went on to Berkeley to study chemical vapor deposition and other semiconductor processing. Um, and my parents, after I graduated and went to applied materials, which is semiconductor equipment, my parents, who are immigrants, asked me, what do I do? And I was like, I need to think about a good way to translate this to Korean. And I said, I make the equipment that makes the brain, which is the chip in the computer. And my mom's like, there's no food. I don't understand this brain thing with computers. I'm really worried about your livelihood. And so I sent them a picture of me in a clean room laboratory gown in front of an industrial background and sent it to them. And during Bible study, my mom still didn't understand what this picture was. So she voted in Bible study and they said, I'm going to be an astronaut. And so my mom and dad thought that was very logical from the picture and like these scientific words Sophia was talking about. Told everybody in Queens, New York that I'm trying to be an astronaut, the first Korean astronaut, Korean American astronaut. So that ended up being a story in itself, as you can imagine, whenever I visited. And so what I did learn from that is my parents loved technology and the benefits it had, but they were not technologists. And I was thinking, what can I do that's more involved with that? And that's when I set my sight to like who's going to benefit from all these semiconductor? It's the products, the consumer electronics, the computers, personal computers was just starting. Mobile it was literally a brick, the size of a brick. You can imagine the cell phones back then. But I saw that with the new semiconductor work that I was doing, those computers and handphones will be smaller. So I went and joined Apple. It took me 4 years to get there. But I ended up going to Apple in their new product development, creating those new products that are first in this category or a different pivot from the way it was defined before. A prime example was MacBook Air. The first one, it was so thin, it went into an envelope. I worked on that project, and that was actually to de-risk a future product called iPad. And so I ended up working on de-risking iPad on my product portfolio. Worked on CarPlay to iCloud, and got into AI because I noticed that for every hardware, there was unlimited software, and the apps that did the best was leveraging AI. And so that's the trend that I saw in Silicon Valley and in Apple. And so that's what I pushed my career into that. I know there were some questions about career. And from there, I ended up joining a small company called Nest, the smart thermostat and smoke detector. And that got purchased by Google. Ended up working there on advanced technology and new product portfolios. And then saw that and working extensively on AI products and capabilities. Then I got recruited to Doppler Lab, which was a startup that failed. You'll hear that a lot with a lot of the startups, ups and downs, but learned so much from that experience as a leader. And then joined Microsoft as the general manager of AI products and search, where I also was the AI representative for the World Economic Forum and the co-chair for one of their councils. I continued my journey there to then become the chief AI technology officer of Business Application Group. So those are all the business apps used in enterprise environment, bringing in Copilot, the Gen AI feature set. And then from there, left to go into self-driving car company Active. The reason is all of my AI work was in the virtual world of software, but there will be a time when AI will work with physical goods like robotics and so forth. And so Aptiv was one of the companies that was working on that for some time, was chief product officer of this $20 billion revenue company and owning the P&L for the business unit in self-driving car. Currently, I'm consulting with National Science Foundation as an AI advisor for their National AI Advisory Board.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Sophia. I mean, what an incredible journey from, going through literally all the most relevant companies of our time. And of course, whether it's through acquisition or taking risk and joining startups, I think maybe we could start with some of the more career related questions because you
Sure.
had such an amazing collection of experiences. And then I'll ask you some more of the trend questions on how folks can better take advantage of the technology now. On career, of course, you've gone through, directly joining a large tech company like Apple or joining a startup and then getting acquired and being a part of a larger organization like Google, or even kind of starting a new product from scratch and figuring out how to de-risk that during your time at Apple, or even just directly at Microsoft, where you're part of an amazing organization, but then trying to figure out how do these new technologies plug in. For each of these pivots in your career, what was your decision-making framework for how to decide what to do?
Yeah. First of all, it's something that I'm curious about and learning more. I would say whenever I was curious about like the trend in AI or in software, I would spend about 20 hours a week, any free time that I had to learn more about the space, see if I can incorporate it in my current role and so forth. But another thing is I'm working on a technology. Who will it benefit? What products will it benefit? And will it be a significant benefit or disruption? And if it is, how can I catch that wave before it starts and peaks? And right now everybody talks about Microsoft and their AI journey, but I joined in 2017. And I would say more than half of my mentors and advocates were just like, why Microsoft? There are other companies that's doing really well. And at 2017, it didn't have the reputation that it has now. It was a very big difference. And what I said, it was like, they're doing something in AI and it's fundamentally different. And I see it and not just hear about it in the words that's being stated by Satya and other executives, but I'm seeing it. The behavior has changed, and I want to be part of that. I don't know what it is, but I wanted to be part of that. And so that's why I joined Microsoft and history was made. Um, so those were some of the things is, am I curious about it where I learn and I see that growth aspects of it. And those who are working with some of the technology, you get to hear about some of the trends that's happening before it goes to the mass market. And how can you be part of that?
I'm so glad you mentioned the timestamp because I was about to mention that for context, OpenAI was only started in 2016. So joining Microsoft in 2017 is literally as early as you can go in terms of being a part of this new wave of innovation. And so I think this is pertinent to some of the questions folks have submitted, for some of the younger grads. Of course, we have older alumni here as well, but for some of the younger students and younger alumni, if they're currently working in an AI related field, what are some of the things that they can do to build higher leverage and kind of accelerate their career?
If you're already using AI, is like learn about the different techniques, understand the overall architect of what made that AI system special versus some of the past ones that failed. So it's not only the ones that's doing well in your company, find out all the ones, all the dead AI system and algos that have died along the way, because you want to learn what was the environment and situation they were in and why did you then go to the next iteration? What were the decision tree around that is super important. Another thing, if you're versed in AI, is understanding data and how that data is being addressed and utilized in the AI algo itself, right? ChatGPT, when it first came out, people talked about the hallucination. Look at this hallucination and so forth. Okay, what is the data this algorithm has been trained on? Everything in the internet, the good, the bad, the ugly. And the very ugly was actually removed with traditional AI. But there's information in the internet that says the world is flat and that cats rule the world. There's just so many videos about them. So obviously that is true. And so those are the hallucination. It's not a bug. It's a feature of how it was created and developed. If you understand that, you know where to avoid and when to use the product even better.
I think you've shared two very practical takeaways that I think are relevant for folks who have no background in AI as well. So, for folks who are getting exposure for the first time, particularly folks who are older alumni who
Yes.
previously didn't have as much exposure, what
Hey,
can they do
Bean,
to more effectively explore their
do you
interests?
have
For
any idea if your
example,
accounting professor has posted
I think,
finals
Daniela,
practice?
you
Probably
are
not, right?
still not on mute. I just muted you.
Okay.
Uh,
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. I was just asking for folks who don't have a background in AI, what are some of the practical steps they can take to kind of explore that interest? For example, they want to look at what underlying data it's
Yes.
being trained on, but ChatGPT isn't necessarily all public. So there are specific models where you can't see exactly what the underlying sources are. And then similarly with your first tip as well, to understand what are the algorithms that have died along the way, what are some resources that folks who don't have a background in AI can go to
Yes.
even look at that database?
Yeah. So, as I stated before, my background is actually mechanical engineering and material science in semiconductor. Really nothing to do with AI. But what was it? My journey is like I saw some of the trends and the opportunity and start learning. And the one of the biggest thing to learn about AI is I believe in something doing daily, 15 minutes a day, doing something that's project based where it's multiple days that you have to work on something that's very, very specific. And then number three is what is it that you can do in your work or for the students that has to do with your education. And the reason I do that is by learning, by experimenting yourself is one of the best way to learn it. And even if you learn about the concept, being able to apply it is when it really goes into like long-term memory, so to speak. So what do I mean by that? Like short term, 15 minutes a day, try out different AI system for 1 month. A lot of people heard ChatGPT. So if you already done ChatGPT, try Anthropic Claude because they have a little bit more focus on safety. And another thing that's going to be interesting is they use the internet, but it's based on French view of English. And you can see aspects of that come through in the thread. And so that's not just the data is the same, is how the developer surface it for you. So when you compare the same question as a chat, as a Claude, you'll find that the answer is a little bit different. And that's like, then you start understanding they're basically on the same data, but how the algo was changed is how you experience it differently. Many day, multiple day projects. I'm thinking about what are you going to do for Christmas? So that's something I was trying to plan. And I have like two kids with very different interests. And I put it into AI system saying, I wanted it this timing with this budget. Give me a list of projects I can work on. Generative AI is not good with specifics. It's good with approximation. So it's better to say, can I get a list of 5 or 10 answers versus trying to get one, because the likelihood of one answer meeting your expectation is very low. And then the third one about work is what are something that maybe you don't enjoy or like to do? Like, for instance, I don't personally like making presentation. So I was like, what kind of AI system is out there that I can leverage? So I decided to use beautiful.ai to make slides. And what used to take me myself hiring like people to make it beautiful and all these other systems, now I can do with beautiful AI in less than 2 hours for something that used to take like 20 hours or so for my own personal time and effort. So these are things that you are get more used to. And like early days of iPhone, there was a saying, there's an app for that. There's literally an AI for this that can help you, but be mindful of the privacy. Data privacy is something I always are keen to. So I pay for ChatGPT and make sure the memory's off so my information is safe in my environment.
It's super helpful. I can definitely hear the consistent thread of curiosity from the beginning of your career throughout, even now with just like this curiosity of let me try that tool. There's an AI for that. Let me test it out and see how it actually works in my use case. And I think that's actually a really helpful tip for folks listening in because we want to lower the barrier to entry enough that, hey, you don't have to work on this massive project as the first thing. You can actually just try something out in your personal life to start. And keep up any sort of comments or questions in the chat going. I know we have someone, I think particularly on Gerald's end, who's going to sort through any questions that you guys have. Another question we had kind of taken in advance, because a lot of folks were asking about this, is what are some of the biggest trends in AI that you feel like students and alumni can really take advantage of?
So obviously generative AI is getting a lot of play outside there, but there is definitely advancement in traditional AI. But in generative AI, one of the big trend is multimodal. And you're hearing more about that. But right now, people are talking about like ChatGPT when it first came out, it was text. Then Dolly came out and it's images. Sora is videos. Then it is audio. So those are things with related to media aspect of it. But multimodal means any kind of data type can be leveraged in this environment. Generative AI especially is great for unstructured data, like data that's not organized in a way. So it's very clear what the different columns and rows are correlated to each other versus traditional AI does much better in that structured environment. So another thing with multimodal is can you combine generative AI and traditional AI more? And that's another trend that you're seeing. Number two trend that is industry specific is because generative AI had made the accessibility to more people without a technical background, you can leverage it in your various industry and function. So you'll see aspects of that showing up more and more.
It's really helpful to hear your perspective because just given your day-to-day work, I'm sure you're seeing more trends and opportunities that are definitely not anywhere near being widely known yet. And I know a lot of the folks in our community was really curious about how do you adopt AI from the lenses of being a consumer versus if I run a small, medium-sized business versus if I were a much larger enterprise or I were a part of a larger enterprise. And so I'm curious, as you're thinking about these different trends and opportunities, how does it relate to these different lenses of just being a consumer
Yeah.
user versus SMB versus enterprise?
Consumer is a lot about convenience and usability. That becomes a priority for how willing they are to experiment. I think Apple Intelligence, how they came out with their products and infused it, made it so it's easier for the regular individual to embrace it in a way that's not with high level of security and privacy, which I respect. On the flip side, with large corporate entity, they also have a lot of proprietary data that is only unique to them and it's vast amounts of data, football, reams of data. And this is a great way to leverage generative AI in their in a controlled environment to try to make sense of that unstructured data as well as layer on the data that's already known to some of the people, but not across all of the company in the silos. For the small companies or companies that are maybe not as tech advanced, is leveraging off the product goods that's out there. Right now, especially, a lot of the AI technology is free or very much subsidized, low at cost. ChatGPT is $20, $30 a month. They still needed additional round of funding. So this is a great way to leverage some of the ideas because what it does is it's not a lot of people talk about AI versus people, and it's really AI with other AI people with AI, right? People versus people leveraging AI. And so there's going to be advantage in leveraging technology. Think about if you're trying to sell things and you didn't have a mobile presence, it would be a lot more challenging to get to the wide audience that you're looking for.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I think what I'm hearing is on the consumer front, if someone's trying to leverage that technology, especially for consumer or even for SMB, it's really important to think about how do you make it easier and even easier for it to be a part of their daily process. And then we're talking about as part of an enterprise, it's really how are you thinking about leveraging all this existing data that they're sitting on that's proprietary to the day-to-day kind of enterprise workings of that larger organization to make the most advantage of that proprietary data they have access to. And then, of course, as we get into actual adoption, there's probably a lot of nuances. Before I kind of ask some of the other questions that we have, I do notice in chat, Matthew asked a question that I think is relevant to the flow of conversation we have now, where he was wondering, what are some of the ways in which you're thinking about the usefulness versus uselessness of AI? Will it always default to LLMs with chat interfaces, or will it be stuck to process optimization, or what is coming next?
Yeah. I think right now, there is definitely an AI hype currently. And so there's just so many different options that's coming out, and not all of it is the quality we would expect. I would say traditional AI, just because of the high costs and infrastructure that's needed, you need specialized individual. People were a lot more purposeful and mindful about what AI products need to be launched, like Nest. If I had the hallucination for a Nest notification, nobody would use the product at all. But a lot more forgiving for these chat, because right now people are, some people like it's like a toy. So it's something they're really experimenting, and that's great. But also realize that are there unique environment or use cases, situations where it can be very helpful. I gave you the thing about traveling. When I asked ChatGPT, it brought up Iceland for the Northern Lights for Christmas. I would never, in my experience, would have thought that was an option, but that's like the one that our family liked the most. And so this is where it increases the ideation, because it's literally everything in the internet versus what your own unique perspective and bias may actually be. Next one is, will the default for LLM be chat interface? As the compute on your devices and computers enhances, it can basically be able to run, maybe not LLM, because that's very significant, but small language models. So it can start doing things real time. So if you notice, if you want to do by voice, there's a long delay associated with it, because it's literally going through the internet, going to the cloud, processing there and coming back, and that does take some time. Will the use case be stuck to process optimization? I think that's one of the biggest fallacy in how people are using AI, is thinking that it's about efficiency. So I talked about my own experience at Apple, that the apps that did the best were leveraging AI. They didn't leverage AI for efficiency. They did it for the innovation and the great features that came out of it. And that's where they made money. So process optimization, I'm not saying that there aren't financial benefits for these companies, but the real growth in the TAM, the total addressable market, is in innovation and new product category and new creation of experiences.
I think that as you're talking about that innovation, this quote jumps to mind of tech sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic, right? Where you're basically trying to think advanced around like how can we leverage the best technologies to help us create these things that almost interact with users in a way that feels like a magical experience. And when we talk about something like that, there's kind of two different types of AI as we're thinking about that. There's like the responsive, where in that chat interface, you're asking a question and it's giving you a response. But then there's also that proactive piece where whether you're a consumer or a business, as you're just kind of in the daily process of behaving, you could have something that pops up and say, would it be helpful if I helped you do X, Y, Z? And I'm curious for your perspective on how quickly that might come.
There are already apps currently available that's on top of the operating system. Like there's one for Mac, the name escapes me, that can provide those insights as well as opportunity to engage without opening a website and all these other things. So, which are all barrier for adoption. I think that more and more people will try it out, and how useful it is for the end customer will decide the success or not, right? And even with that, just because the first iteration is successful doesn't mean it will be the final version, right? MySpace used to be popular in social media, then Facebook, then Instagram and TikTok and so forth. So things will change over time, and we'll see similar evolution of products as we experiment with AI.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you have brought up that I think is really important to mention here and kind of almost double down on as we're chatting about this is also just around data privacy concerns as well, of making sure that you turn memory off and that you're paying for an upgraded version where they're not training with your data. Are there other things like best practices or frameworks that people should think about as they're thinking about how they can better integrate AI into their lives, whether as individual consumers or in the startups that they're building?
One of the things that I think about data privacy is that if I put anything into the system, that if it should come out, am I okay with how it was framed? So if I do a hypothetical situation, I don't actually put my name or other people's name on it. I just say a scientist around this area so that it's more like generic in nature. Just be mindful of that, especially if you're not familiar with the data privacy stance of the products you're using. So that's number one. And if you're not paying for it, you are the data generation that's paying for your service. So just know that that is the trade-off and being very mindful. And when you're in the work environment, just make sure you understand what are approved apps, because there has been a situation where certain IP has been leaked. So example of ChatGPT, if it is something that's going back to ChatGPT, you can reverse engineer and get that data out. Anything that's been put in can be extracted back as an answer if you're not conscious about that. So just be very conscious about what you're sharing. And if it's free, that means your data is being used.
It's a really good point, because I think there are also companies that we don't even know are secretly using our data in the back end. Just a couple days ago, last week, I think it was also reported that LinkedIn had secretly turned on this AI feature that if you're not proactively logging in to opt out of it, that all of your LinkedIn data goes in. And so there's all of these examples where now we almost have to be a little bit more conscientious of what data we want to be used. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, are there just a couple of top of mind pros versus cons and risks of being AI first?
Yeah. Is I'm fine that you're AI first, but be intentional about it and do some research around what are the pros and cons. The reason I state that is I found out a this is, by the way, one of the top questions I get from different executives is that they did not know that their personal information that they're putting in was being leveraged. So one of the person put their photo into ChatGPT and said, make a picture of me in a spacesuit for fun. But now his image was being leveraged to generate other images. And he's a public figure, right? So it didn't look exactly like him, but it has enough that people like question that. So just remember, just be like cautious about things like that, especially about kids. I think that should be monitored. Like if you do have an account, whether your kids have it, make sure it's a shared account so you can see some of the threads and that they understand that, because too many times I've seen even college kids give so much personal information into the system. And if for instance, I do what are top questions that UC Berkeley students and Stanford students are asking, it will respond with some of the questions that's being asked as the example.
That's definitely a good one to ask. I wouldn't be surprised if folks are now going to test that prompt out as the next thing. And of course, we've talked about the risks of being AI first and being conscientious if we're being AI first. I know a number of the folks in the audience are now trying to leverage this technology to kind of solve new problems. And I'm curious if there's a couple that come to mind. As these are some of the newest, toughest problems in the consumer and enterprise spaces that
Yeah.
actually now can be solved with AI.
Yes, yes. Like one of the things is really great in so there was a private um LLM that was being used in Tesla where they were asking, they put all the information of their design for the various engines and so forth and the materials used and gave like a periodic table of the different materials and said, we want to make the next generation of engines with as minimum rare earth materials as possible. And it gave, and you don't ask for one answer. So that's one of the things with LLM, think about options and said, so they gave like 5, 10 answers of engine design, of which 2 of them were like really something out of the box that the team didn't think about. Now, that doesn't mean that people and designers are no longer thinking about this. They're now taking of the 10 that was provided 2 as well as something they thought of themselves together, and they're investigating that and researching it further. But that's pretty amazing. That normal journey would have been 4 years, and that was less than a week or so. So I thought that was a great example of thinking differently, being innovative, co-piloting together versus in competition.
Certainly. I want to also ask you just a little bit around predictions. I know that no one has a crystal ball, but I think if anyone were, probably you would be the closest to being that. And then, of course, after we talk about predictions, I want to take Alan and Matthew's questions in chat as well. So for anyone else who has questions, please feel free to keep the good questions coming. But around predictions, I'm curious if you have any predictions for what's coming and where AI is going in the short versus medium versus long run.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are going to experiment with AI. I think majority of them will not be as fruitful because it's not intentional. I see a lot of people's like, I have 1,000 AI projects being worked on right now in my company. It's like, okay, how does it serve a purpose that's directly aligned to their business strategy? And if it's not, then what is the value of all the effort and work and resources being focused on that? Number two, the hype is, we're definitely in the hype, and that will, people will be disenchanted, and then you'll see true value. But the true innovators will continue incorporating AI because it is such a game changer. It's significant. Like I said, the apps that did the best on the App Store, almost all of them exclusively used AI. And that was early days. And you can imagine how much more they are. And they're the top companies that you see in the exchange. One thing I do know is that nobody can predict the future. I don't care how smart, how connected you are, you cannot see the future. But one thing I do know is that change is part of that. That I can say and predict 100%. So the one thing a lot of the people I talk to is like, how can I be better prepared to leverage AI or all these advancement? Or students, what should I do next? The biggest strength is your curiosity and your capability to learn. Because think about even 10 years ago, how many of us, very accomplished, intelligent individuals, would have predicted something like ChatGPT? Very few, very few. And so, but if you can learn, then you can catch up on that. Another thing, a question that we were talking offline is like these students are interested in what should I do next? Is continue learning about the AI space. That is going to be one of the big technology disruptor for the next 20 years, at least. And the opportunities are that it will be infused in all aspects of our business and personal life. If there's an area of passion that you have, like lawyers and legal, for instance, how can AI be incorporated there and how to get in front of it and be part of that team that's investigating that? And you'll learn so much there.
I I think it's actually perfect that you share that because we have some really good questions in chat that are kind of building on a number of the items that you mentioned. Alan's question is around how do you think Gen AI is transforming some of these traditional middle management jobs? Speaking of change, he is asking, how do you envision future managers' jobs evolving, especially since the latest news came out, Amazon CEO is already removing these middle managers. What kind of change do you expect there?
I think that I don't know about middle management, but it's more of transforming management roles in general, is like how to leverage AI system to understand all the different components and what people are doing in your organization and how to synthesize it even better in a way that is directly correlated to your business and what you're doing, your job function. But I think that everybody, just like everybody now really uses computers and cell phone in their work, I would say that people, every job out there will need some kind of interface with AI. And some of it be user friendly and some of it won't be. But understanding that in your role is very important.
I'll take the remaining couple of questions in chat now and then open it up to folks who are in person, because I know they'll probably want to stand up in front of the camera to ask you the question directly as well. And I'll open that invitation to anyone online as well if you want to unmute and turn on video to ask questions to Sophia directly as well. So let me take the couple remaining in chat. Matthew has a question around, do you have any suggestions for entrepreneurs as you're starting to approach customers? It's hard to build trust as someone with no brand recognition, for example. So the classic trap is to build before a problem or customer is identified, and there's a chicken and egg problem there. So how do you go about signing on first customers?
First of all, uh, if it's an area you're interested in, you most likely have customers in mind, and it's someone within your network, social network, and in group. And so I think that's very important. And if you're trying to solve something without truly understanding the customer, the likelihood the product actually will be successful decreases. It's something I learned when I was at Apple is that we create products for age 8 to 80. And at the time, I was in my mid 30s. And then it's like, it was a long time since I was 80 years old, and times are different. And I've never been 80 years old. So how am I supposed to make a product that resonate with this wide group? So it was really being curious and learning about what is their day like? What are the things, some of the challenges they're going through? How can my product help them in this space? How can a kid learn from this product? So those were the things that's really important. And in the customer is like, I've also done a lot of volunteer work for different customer demographic I don't have access to, or I don't normally socialize with. And that has been very enriching. I always think there should be a customer first, though. Who are you trying to target? And my target, for instance, is age 8 to 80. How do I make AI serve people and ensure that it's built to support humanity, right?
Yeah, I love that approach, where if you're trying to build a solution, put out a list of literally names of people that you can sit down with for, half a day or a few hours and shadow how they might interact with a solution or your product. I think that's a wonderful place to start. I know Ivan has a slightly different type of question. Ashwin, I see your hand up. I'm going to take the last, I think, two questions in chat, and then I'll come right over to you. Feel free to keep your hand up, though.
Thank you.
Ivan has a slightly different kind of question. So, out of actually the entrepreneurship classes I've taught at Berkeley and Stanford, we get this kind of question a lot. So I think Ivan's asking a really good question. And he's asking, he's building a startup that isn't necessarily an AI first company. They have machine learning need in the pipeline for sure, but they don't want to be over promising. And it has, as a result of that, measurably hurt their fundraising because they're not selling the AI component of it. You mentioned a couple times that we're definitely in a hype cycle right now. What are your thoughts about the state of being able to raise? Does AI first investments get divested soon enough? Does rate cutting help get non-AI first startups better funding? What are your thoughts around where we are?
Yeah. I think Mike Siebel from Y Combinator stated a lot about how there's like a software hype. This is about 10 years ago or something. I would definitely listen to his Decode interview because it resonates so much with the environment. I remember some of the AI companies that Microsoft was considering before Gen AI, like really high quality, consistently, and people who've done it before, who's actually worked like Gen AI individuals are not somebody that just discovered AI. Or Gen AI only. They've worked on traditional AI data environment to get the learnings that's needed to build on something bigger. So I would say that's number one. Yes, there are investments going to AI or companies that are stating they're AI, but when you disappoint, your next fundraising is not going to go as well. And that's some of the challenges that I'm seeing as well. As Fed cuts rate, it just makes money more plentiful in the market. It's a lower cost and risk associated with it. So I do see that, investment in a non-AI startup will also be in line, but some kind of data strategy is important because eventually every company will be AI first, right? Like most companies now are digital, like mindful of it. And so I see that also happening with AI.
I have two kind of remaining questions from chat that I think actually go really well hand in hand from Sayap and from Barbie. I'll take that question and then Ashwin, I'll go over to you. So Sayap and Barbie were asking, there are algorithms where there was bias that singled out minorities. Has that changed or improved over time? And Barbie's question was also around kind of underlying data sources. Any solutions, like should the solution that you're using to generate require attribution and to the sources that are used by the AI? What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on relevant, policies and regulations related to that?
So there are definitely bias in the algorithm, just like there's bias in every one of us that's here. So I give you Nest thermostat. The algorithm was created by people who live in sunny California, where it's a high 68, low 68, not a cloud in the sky. And we were trying to plan something of what is comfortable temperature for somebody who lived in UK, which has incredibly high energy costs and it's pretty cold there. And people thought 62 was normal. Like nobody in California thought that was a normal temperature range. And we thought that was like an issue. And so the reason I say that is bias happens, and the way to address it is for all people's experience and perspective to be added into the system. So if you think about the people who are creating AI system, it's a small demographic out of the 8 billion people around the world. And right now, the people who are using AI, right now, we're at a very pivotal point around where AI is going, not just for now, but in the future, because we're creating the foundational ecosystem that everything is built upon. And so right now, who is using AI, they're weighing their feedback greater than all the past because they see it as a correction. So another reason why I want everyone here, these amazing group of students and alumni, to get more involved in this AI system is that's how you combat biases, because your feedback matters. It shouldn't be a small group of people that's defining it for the rest of the world. Like right now, if you look at LLM, they're all Americanized version. So even if they translate, I'm Korean American, my husband is Ecuadorian, the Korean American version of it or the Hispanic version of it is an Americanized version of the world. So until you get feedback from those other groups around the world, that gets incorporated in the algo. And we're right now at the retraining of the algo. And that becomes the foundation for things to be built upon. Okay. So minorities are there are biases against minorities of anywhere in the world. The best way is for the minorities to be more mindful in working on these amazing AI systems. And also, you're going to get benefit from it too.
Yeah, it sounds like one of the top places to start is certainly around education as well. So I think for folks who are even showing up to this event, it's a great place to start to learn more. And then I think to Barbie's question, she was asking around citation and attribution of sources, and your thoughts on policies and regulations.
Yeah. So if you look at traditional AI, so search engine as example is powered like almost exclusively with traditional AI. They, in the very, very beginning of internet, did not always cite all of their information. That's something that actually, because of feedback, it grew into that. And then now look at the internet now, there are citation, but there should be even more so. The reason why it's super important to cite and give credit to the creator is they are the origin of the information that all these algorithms and the system and the value we get, but are they also benefiting from the system? So I think it's a very important thing. There's different policy and regulation that are in the pipeline around the world associated with it, and thinking about that. I do want to go to Ashwin, even if we go, I know there's more questions. Maybe Ashwin, you could ask the next question. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
Ashley.
you so much, Sophia. I really appreciate your time here. You've given such a phenomenal discussion and insights that I've written down, and I'm really grateful. So the question that I wanted to ask was that what's one piece of advice that has you've kept with you that's like gotten you through your toughest times as a advisor, as a executive,
Yeah.
entrepreneur, henceforth?
Um, so I'm going to be very real about this. I ended up having to support my family at different times in my life and had to be very focused on my career. And it was really important not to give up on your relationship. Like the career and technology is great, but that's not going to be there. It's not going to be enough when it's the hardest time. It's the people you have in your life that don't always invest time for them. They're just as important to the technology and their career and all those aspirations. And one of the person that's been a big difference is my husband was my college sweetheart and best friend, and still remains, well, not college, but now my husband and my best friend as well. But having that community, and I have two kids that are teenagers, and we can have conversations um, about challenging topics
Yeah,
versus like I may not know what color his book bag is, but I can tell you his stance on different things of the world, and I think that makes a huge difference. That's why I do the work that I do.
that's lovely. Thank you so much, Sophia. I really appreciate it.
I
Uh,
love that. I'll take Cecilia's question in chat, and then maybe we'll also take one more question from the physical room as well for anyone who wants to come up. Cecilia was asking to an earlier point, Sophia, you had made around providing feedback. What's a good way to provide feedback to Gen AI platforms and products as a user?
So on the very bottom, on the left and right hand corner, like usually shaded in gray, there's way for you to do feedback. They make a huge difference. That's number one. Number two, if there's something you're passionate about the result, drop a comment. They're like literally looking at every single comment right now and really thinking about that. And a part of that is, somebody asked about Barbie asked about the policy and regulation. Some of the policy and regulation is, are you providing feedback to correct your algorithm so it doesn't harm people? Right? It may be biased towards one way or not, but in the process, are you respecting everybody in your platform? So things like that are coming up. So your feedback right now, Cecilia, is super important. So I really appreciate that. Another thing that you can do is start working for some of these tech companies too. You'll have definitely a big feedback there.
A great point. I know Alan has one more question in chat. If there's anyone in the room who wants to ask a question, please feel free to come up to the camera so I can see you. I know the owl has kind of a slow pan, so I'll give you kind of a minute to walk up there. But I'll take Alan's question in the meantime. He was wondering how you think about traditional education should change with Gen AI. How should exams and tests evolve?
Okay. So I think traditional education, the act of learning is important and that should be remain. But I would love the education to focus on keeping kids curious and learning to learn about any topics that are not in some way spoon fed to you, right? Like you're like, I have US history, here's the syllabus, this is how you learn it. And that's at the end of it, you have various essays to show that you are competent in that. So, well, what if I want to learn something new that I know nothing about? How do I learn that? And how do I go from a novice to a practitioner to become a mastery if I want to do that? Like that's what I did, right? I knew nothing about AI, was a mechanical engineer. We don't really work with like data in that kind of way. But how did I go do that? And that's, going back to the question that Ashwin was saying, like, what is another great learning? It's like remain curious. Because curious means it's not, and like the way kids are curious. They're curious, they play around so many different ways. They don't care if it fails. They know that that's part of the learning journey. And that's how you go from falling down on a bike to traveling across town. And look at how much your world expanded. Your world was like 2 blocks that you walked, and now it can be miles away, and you meet so many different things. And I really appreciate that. Another thing about Gen AI is that Gen AI has to be incorporated, but that doesn't mean it replaces how one thinks or learns something. You still have to look at it with a critical eye. And how to go do that, I think that's very important. And being more data centric. And that data sometimes can skew things one way or another. So how to ask those right questions so that you can make your own decisions about that. How our exams and tests should be evolved. I think it more and more should be real life examples, things that people can, it resonates with them. And that is based on like the information that's provided. How do you not manipulate, how do you massage and like actually utilize the data in a way to do the decision making to get to the answer for the exam? And sometimes it's not just one answer. There may be more than one answer, because in life, I have found that it's very rare that there's one problem and there's only one answer. Most of the time, it's a plethora of answers.
I really appreciate you sharing, Sophia. I know we're at time, but we have 2 questions in the physical room. Would that be okay with you if we
Of
took
course.
questions? Awesome. Let me pass it over to the room.
Hey, Sophia. My name's Hector. It's nice to hear your talk today. My question has to do kind of specifically within the consumer packaged goods space, specifically around supply chain management. I have this app that I've been working on for maybe a little too long without actually releasing it. And specifically, I wanted to know if you have any resources or people that you recommend that I connect with around applying AI for ingredient supply stream visibility app that I'm working on. So around helping CPG companies do that specifically.
Yeah. Sometimes there's local vendors that serves a region or neighborhood, and they would be greatly benefit from having some kind of those visibility in their supply chain. And the reason I say that versus like targeting Procter and Gamble and so forth is that you will actually get raw data from those businesses that you can help out. You can interact with the customers, what they're thinking about. Because you did work in your neighborhood with these small, like regional businesses, the likelihood that you could do statewide and bigger footprint and more complex supply chain, you can grow upon it, right? And adjust your algorithm associated with it. Number 2 is any of the variables that you're using in your algorithm, make sure that it can change. It's not a fixed point in how it's interpreting the data. Because what applies to a smaller supply chain versus a global supply chain, those may be the factor, or you may have to add in additional factors. Like, for instance, the weather in California, I joke about as being high 68, low 68, but the weather is pretty temperate and even. But now if you're doing something in the Northeast, it was negative 16. By the way, your teeth can shatter if you leave your mouth open enough. I found out. Do not do that. Is that that's a very different environment for supply chain challenges, right? And so you have to have an algorithm that has the extendability for the unknowns or some of the things may scale. So those are just some examples that come top of mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know there's one more question in the room.
All right, Sophia, it's actually me. So I have a question. I read some article and I read as an opinion a while back that says the generative AI wave is actually reducing our progress towards AGI. And that's because everyone is just focusing on generative AI. No one's actually building on advancing the newest technologies. So I guess part of this consideration here, and I guess the question I have is, what is really the barriers to our next development now, the frontier, right? Is it the lack of manpower? Is it the lack of data? Is it the lack of power, like generating power, electricity? What is the bottleneck there?
So the first part of your question is about the research focus in AI. A lot of people are focusing on Gen AI versus other things that may contribute to AGI. The way I see it is AGI is a more complex system, and we do not have a system right now with generative AI that is safe for all at all times. So part of like early days of cars, the number of people that died was pretty significant, right? When there was car crashes and so forth. And people used to be able to drive any surface that the car they felt comfortable driving. And a lot of people died from that. It wasn't when there was some kind of framework of where everybody knew that this is the rule of the road that more and more people were able to drive and live on to tell for the next drive, and that commerce and supply chain that that was stated before could happen. I do not believe the policy and regulation currently is at that stage yet. And this is a good stepping stone to get some of that framework in line before we have a more complex, more powerful AGI system in play. So that's number one. Number two, what are some of the barriers to do that? Is that, so going back to my semiconductor background, compute capability. So what took 22 years to leverage with CPUs now takes 2 seconds with GPU. 22 years versus 2 seconds. So that's amazing compute. But with that amazing compute is enormous amount of resource in energy and cooling system. Because you can imagine it's burning through so quickly in order to process the whole of internet for multiple decades. So, we talk about environmental, that's not sustaining in its own. So how do you make a sustainable system, an ecosystem actually, that leverage is across the board? So it can be not something that we can only do for a short period of time, but we can do more extensively. So the amount of compute that AGI will be needing is, again, another what GPU was 22 years, it will now take 2 seconds, right? In some ways. I say that in jest, but those are some of the things of note.
I saw we have one last question in chat. Sophia, is it okay to ask you that one last question?
Sure.
It's from Sayap, who asked if we're going to have offline versions of AI, especially for countries with little to no access to the internet, because he's been running STEM academies in Africa for kids and youth on projects that don't require the internet. They build, design, and test and solve problems. And he's wondering how he can introduce these communities to AI.
Yeah. Currently, large language model is based on copious amount of data. And even then, you see the hallucinations on the edges, right? As you have smaller data, there's more hallucination because what percentage of it, about percentage and so forth, that's number one. Are there ways to do traditional AI offline? Absolutely. We've been doing it whenever your cell phone loses connectivity and you don't have Wi-Fi, it still works. There's a lot of AI to make that a cell phone work and the different apps work. So there are aspects that can leverage it. But if you're talking about LLM, it's large language model. So you're looking for a small language model. It is something that, going back to Gerald's question about what are some of the advancements, that is a huge area of focus. Can we have smaller models so it also uses less energy but be more effective? How can we go do that? We're not there yet, but it's coming. And there some of the corporate companies have been using like medium language models for their environment and also leveraging a lot more traditional AI to gap the hallucinations.
Thank you so much for your time, Sophia. I know that we can keep on going all night long if folks could have the opportunity, but I really appreciate you staying so late Eastern time to be with us today. And we're excited to hopefully have you in person in the Bay Area soon enough. And I know that Gerald is about to host 2 more in-person events for Decode. So I'll let Gerald put the sign-in information into chat for anyone who's interested, or feel free to reach out to Gerald directly, of course, if you guys want to come out in person to any events. Otherwise, without further ado, again, a huge virtual round of applause to Sophia, and physical one for folks who are hang out in person on campus at Berkeley. And we'll see you all at the next one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care.